felt like I was 22 years old again this past Friday, all smiles and energy and anticipation, walking with my cap and my gown to stand with my class, awaiting to parade into the stadium of the College of New Jersey, TCNJ, where graduation took place 2 days ago. Some of my classmates, a full generation younger than I, saw me as I came to join the group, and they all shouted, "Thomas!" And I felt like I was one of them. Or at least I felt that way until they all started pulling out these 1-ounce bottles of various spirits from their pockets. Something at the age of nearly 40 I didn't think to prepare to do nor feel compelled to do. Though I was a little curious if they'd invite me to an after party if there was one. Commencement was a great experience. We had a beautiful day on Friday. After 6 years working on this degree, 10 classes, hundreds of pages of written assignments, I finally graduated with my MA in English literature. Half a dozen people have already asked me, what will I do next? And I've thought about maybe another degree or leaning into a new hobby. But where I've landed on is I'm just going to sleep for 6 months. It has been quite a haul. I also had 3 children in those 6 years. I bring this up because I think for the disciples, the ascension was somewhat similar to a graduation. They too were likely wearing robes. Jesus offered a kind of commencement address. They had spent 3 years working on their master's degree in following Jesus. They performed tons of field work for the degree, deep reflection on theory and methodology. Tragically, one member of the disciples' class dropped out. It was a haul. Their families and their bank accounts took a hit. And in the end, they ended up on their own. Their teacher, their rabbi, disappeared. While he was blessing them, he withdrew from them and was carried up into heaven. The Ascension was actually celebrated this last Thursday, always the 40th day of Easter. As it said in the Acts reading, it was after 40 days that Jesus ascended. And what the day answered for those first generation of Christians was, where did Jesus go? You said he was raised and then he was with you for a while, appearing here or there. Well, where did he go? As it said in Ephesians, God raised him from the dead, seated him at his right hand in the heavenly places. He didn't run away. He didn't die again, they said. He rose into heaven. And so the day is the attempt to explain Jesus' whereabouts, and it marks that, but it also marks an abrupt change, a pivot point. This is where I see a connection to the graduation as well. I think of the word commencement is actually about beginning something. Graduation, yes, is the end, but they give a commencement address because all of these people who've prepared for so long are about to begin something new. This was exactly where the disciples were at. After 3 years of working on their course of study, they'd followed him for 3 years. He was arrested, put to death, but he came back as a new and improved Jesus who could walk through walls. But after 40 days, they suddenly lost him again. An abrupt change. Like an army losing a general in the midst of the battle, a team losing their head coach in the midst of a playoff run, a movement losing their founder and leader. It was an abrupt change for the disciples. When was the last time you experienced an abrupt change? Someone or something was there, and suddenly it was not. Related to health or a job change, to a move, to the death of a loved one. Changes like that have a power to overwhelm us. While at TCNJ, I learned of a classmate in the English department who experienced abrupt change as a child. Her name is Jessica. When she was 5 years old, her mother died, and then at 8 years old, her father got cancer and died as well. She said she retreated and lost herself in books as an 8-year-old girl and pretty much stayed there through high school. It was a story of heart-wrenching loss, abrupt change, how we deal with it. I think how these abrupt changes happen for organizations and institutions as well. I think of the abrupt change the church has experienced over the last 40 years in this country. Our denomination of Lutherans, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the ELCA, it was founded in 1988. A few Lutheran denominations got together and they formed it. And in 1988, it had over 5 million members. 35 years later, we now have only 3 million. Pretty much all churches are experiencing this abrupt change. And it's not a great feeling, it's unsettling. Sometimes these abrupt changes are things we know are coming as well. I was talking with a dear friend this past week. He's a surgeon. It's strange when you know someone as an 18-year-old immature young man in college and they grow up to be surgeons holding people's lives in their hands. But we were catching up on life and work and asking, about his stress level, how are things going, and he shared how it's hard to keep up at work, but it's not as stressful as those first few years after residency. He talked about those first procedures when he was truly on his own, asking himself, do I have what it takes? Can I hold it together if something goes unplanned? If I screw something up, nobody is watching over my shoulder. Abrupt changes like this cause us to feel unsettled and afraid. It puts us in a vulnerable place. They bring our true selves out into the open because we don't have someone else to hide behind anymore. Am I up to the task now that I'm on my own? The disciples were no longer in residency with Jesus watching over their shoulders. He's gone, floated up like the smoke we saw from the candle. Would the disciples have what it takes? Could Peter teach with authority like Jesus? Could Matthew preach a sermon to save his life? Could Thomas's belief be sustained without Jesus right there, always in his sight? Can tap into their fear and uncertainty at that moment. But I think Jesus anticipated this. In his commencement address, he points to all of the ways the disciples have been equipped. They had in them what they needed for this pivot after this abrupt change, to go from being the church led solely by Jesus to being the church led by his followers. It said, first, he opened their minds to understand the scriptures, equipped them, not only to deal with change, but to make the change, to proclaim his name to all nations. That's what he tasked them to do. They no longer had Jesus in their midst, but they had a great purpose to carry on his movement. And he equipped them for it with the Holy Spirit. He said, I will give you what the Father has promised. Again, you can imagine the smoke. It went from a candle contained to the smoke filling the room. The Spirit of God present with each of us, which is what we'll celebrate next week with Pentecost. Ascension is always the Sunday before Pentecost, when we celebrate that Spirit that Jesus left us with. Yes, those disciples lost their teacher and rabbi, but they still had hope for the work they had to carry on to do. As Peter Marty, Lutheran pastor and editor of the Christian Century magazine, wrote, here's the real surprise about hope. It thrives especially well in situations where the evidence seems to be mounting against us. Hope thrives where the evidence seems to be mounting against us. This past Friday, something else noteworthy happened. A very well-known, respected leader in the church, Tim Keller, died. He's written books that millions of people have read. He's more on the conservative side of Christianity, his theological positions, but not in that ugly, judgmental, or hypocritical way that we often read about. He always shared his views with respect and openness. He left judgment and fire and brimstone behind. In 1989, he chose to pivot with his family. He moved to New York City. He actually grew up in Pennsylvania, I think a Bucknell graduate, went on to seminary, and then eventually he and his family moved to New York City in 1989. The New York Magazine heard about him because I think he was a writer at that time, and they called it a theological suicide mission to create a strictly conservative Christian church in the heart of Sodom, New York City in the 80s. All the evidence was mounted against him. Yet it seems that is when hope thrived most. While I disagree with his view of the Bible as inerrant, that's not how we teach it or read it here, and I disagree with his views on sexuality, I still can respect his commitment to serving the poor and racial justice, trying to tell a city about the love of Jesus. That's what he focused on in his ministry. He managed to grow a church from 5 people in his family to 5,000 there in Sodom. 5,000 members. Now they have campuses spread across New York. I checked out the church website, and the first thing I saw was a tab that said, "Skeptics Welcome." It said, "We couldn't be more thrilled that you're ready to begin exploring the reality of Jesus' resurrection in a logical, understandable fashion. We'd love to talk with you about your journey, get you connected with people who care about you, whether at Redeemer or elsewhere." Keller died on Friday after a battle with cancer, but he leaves his churches and their pastors and leaders equipped with his teaching and his sense of purpose to serve the city. They'll need that spirit of courage, just like those disciples did, to carry on their service and teaching. They'll need courage like Jessica, the student from my school, my alma mater now, my new alma mater. They'll need courage like Jessica. That same day that Tim Keller died last Friday, I learned more about Jessica. All the evidence had mounted against her. She'd lost her parents before the age of 10. She went on, as I said, to kind of lose herself in books. As a child, must have had a good librarian, good teachers. In school, her teachers noticed her love of reading and encouraged her on her way to study English at TCNJ. She continued a 5th year after graduating and earned her master's degree, which she earned on Friday. And she was in my class this last semester. We were studying the British Romantics, and she was quiet. I had no idea really who she was or what her story was until she was the one chosen to share at the commencement address. She'd been selected by her classmates to speak. She shared how she took a class in the literature of the prison, works written about prison and written by prisoners. It ignited in her a passion for justice in the prison system. And her professor invited her to co-teach a class at the prison that was within range of the school. They taught a class on memoir to prisoners. She worked directly sitting with prisoners to craft their stories. It carried on after class, often through letter writing as the only form of correspondence. I see it as an ascension story, from abrupt change in her life to finding deep, meaningful purpose, culminating in this day on Friday, addressing several hundred of us. She shared a perfect quote from Toni Morrison. "When you get these jobs that you have been so brilliantly trained for, just remember that your real job is that if you are free, you need to free somebody else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else. Jesus may have left his disciples, but he didn't leave them powerless. He left them with freedom and power and purpose to face change with courage, to rise up wounded like Jess, but believing she had something to offer the world. What is your ascension story this year? Your pivot from abrupt change to godly purpose. Perhaps you're just about to write it.